Hello, my name is Aurelian, a quiet traveler and keeper of old stories. The day had already begun to fade in the most ordinary way possible. Nothing dramatic marked its passing. No sudden change in the sky, no sharp line between afternoon and evening. The light simply softened, as if the world had exhaled and decided to rest a little. Along a narrow dirt path bordered by tall grass that barely moved in the still air, the evening settled into place. The path had been there for years, shaped by countless quiet footsteps, by rain pressing it flat, by time doing what it always does without asking for attention. The grass on either side leaned slightly inward, not enough to block the way, just enough to suggest familiarity. Each blade was a different shade of green, some pale, some deeper, some already beginning to yellow at the tips. They stood without purpose, growing where they were, doing what grass does best. Nothing remarkable, nothing rushed. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called once, then again, then stopped. The sound didn't demand a response, it didn't echo. It simply existed and then didn't. The path continued forward, gently curving in a way that made it impossible to see too far ahead. It wasn't mysterious. It wasn't hidden. It was just long enough to encourage slow movement, the kind that doesn't think much about where it's going. A light breeze passed through, brushing the tops of the grass, causing a soft, uneven ripple. It moved without pattern, without repetition that needed tracking. The breeze came, lingered for a moment, and moved on, leaving the air exactly as it had been before. The ground beneath the path was firm but forgiving, packed earth mixed with fine gravel. Each step would feel predictable here, the same texture again and again. No surprises, no sudden changes, just steady ground, patiently waiting. Off to one side beyond the grass stood a line of trees. Not a dense forest, not an open field, just a quiet gathering of trunks and branches that had grown alongside one another for a long time. Their leaves barely stirred, holding on to the remaining warmth of the day. The trees didn't lean dramatically. They didn't twist or stretch. They simply stood tall enough to offer shade earlier, calm enough now to blend into the softening light. As the sun lowered further, the colors of the evening shifted slowly. So slowly it was difficult to notice unless one paid attention for a long time. Greens became muted. Browns warmed. Shadows lengthened without sharp edges, spreading gently across the ground like a blanket laid down with care. A small stone rested near the edge of the path. It was smooth, worn down by weather and time. Its color was unremarkable, somewhere between gray and brown, with a faint lighter streak running across it. It had no special shape, no significance. It had been there yesterday, it would likely be there tomorrow. Nearby, a patch of moss clung to the base of one tree, dense and soft-looking, thriving quietly in the shade. It held moisture from earlier in the day, remaining cool even as the air slowly cooled around it. The moss didn't move. It didn't need to. The path continued onward, steady and patient. As the light dimmed further, the sky shifted into gentle layers, pale blue giving way to softer gray, then faint hints of warmer tones near the horizon. No bold colors appeared. Nothing demanded attention. The sky seemed content to fade quietly, as it had done countless times before. Another breeze moved through, slightly cooler this time. It carried no particular scent, just the clean, neutral smell of earth and plants resting after a long day of growing. Somewhere unseen, an insect made a brief sound. Then silence returned. The silence here wasn't empty. It was full of small, unnoticed things continuing as they always did. Roots drawing moisture, leaves settling, the ground holding its shape, the air remaining still between passing breezes. The path did not hurry, neither did the evening. Step by step, moment by moment, everything moved at exactly the pace it needed to, without effort, without thought. And as the last warmth of the day slowly slipped away, the world remained exactly what it was meant to be. Quiet, steady, and unchanging in the most comforting way. As the evening continued, the path gradually widened without announcing the change. It didn't suddenly open up or transform into something new. It simply became a little broader, allowing more space on either side, as if it had learned over time that there was no need to stay narrow. The grass thinned slightly here, replaced by low plants that stayed close to the ground. Their leaves were small and rounded, collecting the last traces of daylight on their surfaces. Some leaves overlapped others, creating layers that looked the same no matter how long one observed them. The earth beneath the path felt unchanged, steady, familiar, gently worn smooth. Small pebbles were scattered throughout, each settled into place long ago. None shifted, none demanded notice. Off to the left, the trees spaced themselves farther apart. Between them, the land dipped gently, forming a shallow hollow where cooler air seemed to gather. The hollow wasn't deep enough to hold water, just deep enough to feel slightly different, slightly quieter. The air here felt stiller. Sounds softened as if they had farther to travel before being heard. A fallen branch rested near the edge of the hollow. It was dry and pale, stripped of bark in places where time and weather had worked patiently. It lay exactly where it had fallen, with no intention of moving again. Small cracks ran along its surface, each one the result of slow changes rather than sudden breaks. Beyond the hollow, the ground rose gently again, continuing the same pattern it always had. Up a little, down a little, never extreme. The land seemed to understand balance. The sky overhead continued its slow dimming. The brighter tones near the horizon softened into muted layers, blending into one another so smoothly that no single color could be named with certainty. The light didn't disappear, it simply spread thinner. A quiet rustle moved through the leaves of one tree, then another. Not wind exactly, just the natural settling of branches adjusting their weight. The sound was brief and subtle, ending almost as soon as it began. Nothing followed it. The path curved again, this time more gently, offering a view of what lay ahead without revealing too much. There was no sense of anticipation, no reason to wonder. Whatever came next would be much like what already was. Along the right side of the path, a stretch of ground was covered in fine, dry soil. It showed faint marks, impressions left by passing feet, softened by time until they were barely noticeable. The marks overlapped and faded, blending into one another until none stood out. Here and there, small plants had pushed through the soil, their stems thin but determined, growing without urgency. They didn't compete. They simply occupied the space available to them. The air cooled another degree, barely noticeable, just enough to feel different from moments before. The warmth of the day continued to sink slowly into the ground, where it would linger long after the sky had darkened. Somewhere farther away than before, a bird called again. The sound was softer this time, lower, as if the bird itself was becoming quieter. The call echoed faintly, then dissolved into the evening. The path remained unchanged. As darkness approached, details didn't vanish. They simplified. Shapes became softer, edges less defined. The trees became silhouettes rather than individual trunks and branches. The grass blended into a single gentle mass. The hollow to the left filled with shadow, smooth and even. No sharp darkness appeared, only the kind that settles slowly, making no demands. A faint scent of soil rose into the air as the temperature shifted. It was subtle, familiar, easy to ignore if one wished. The scent lingered briefly, then faded, replaced by nothing at all. The sky now held fewer colors, but it felt no emptier. It felt settled. The kind of sky that had seen many evenings pass and treated each one the same. The path continued onward, steady and quiet, carrying the calm forward without effort. Everything remained as it was, ordinary, predictable, and gently unchanged, moving together into the quiet of the coming night. The path led onward into a deeper quiet. Not because anything had ended, but because everything had settled into its place. The widening from earlier remained, giving the space a feeling of ease, as though there was no need to be precise anymore. The ground held the last warmth of the day. It rose gently from the earth, too faint to see, just enough to soften the cooling air above it. The warmth did not travel far. It stayed close to where it belonged. The grass now appeared darker, its individual blades no longer easy to distinguish. Together, they formed a calm, even surface, bending slightly under their own weight. Dew had not yet formed, but the air hinted that it would later on, without urgency. The trees stood quietly along the edges of the land, their leaves now mostly still. Any remaining movement came from slow adjustments, branches easing into comfortable positions after the day's light had faded. The sky continued its steady transition. The higher parts deepened into a soft, unremarkable blue, while the horizon grew indistinct. No stars had appeared yet, and none were expected soon. The sky was in no hurry. A small clearing appeared ahead, barely different from the path itself. It was not open enough to feel exposed, just open enough to feel slightly wider. The ground here was smoother, the grass shorter, as if it had been resting this way for a long time. At the edge of the clearing, a flat stone lay embedded in the soil. Its surface was cool and even, worn down until it held no sharp corners. It reflected almost no light, absorbing the dimness instead. The air remained quiet. Then faintly a sound appeared, something subtle and distant. It might have been an insect or the soft movement of leaves brushing against one another far away. The sound did not repeat in the same way twice. It rose briefly, then faded, leaving behind the stillness it had interrupted. The stillness felt complete, not empty. It existed between sounds, holding space without effort. The path crossed the clearing and continued on the other side, unchanged. Its edges blended smoothly into the surrounding ground, as if there were no clear boundary between where the path ended and the land began. The temperature continued its gradual descent. Each moment felt slightly cooler than the last, but the change was so slow it barely registered. The air adapted naturally, like everything else. Somewhere low to the ground, a tiny movement occurred. A small creature shifting in the grass, unnoticed and unconcerned. The movement made no sound loud enough to track, and it ended almost as soon as it began. Above, the sky finally began to release a few faint points of light. Not many, just enough to suggest their presence. They did not sparkle or draw attention. They simply existed, steady and distant. The trees now appeared as dark outlines against the sky, their shapes blending together. Individual branches were harder to see, and there was no need to try. The whole scene felt simplified, reduced to its most basic elements. The clearing passed behind, leaving the path once again bordered closely by grass and low plants. The ground here felt the same as it always had, firm and familiar. A breeze passed through, cooler than before. It moved slowly, touching the tops of the grass, brushing the edges of leaves. It did not linger. It had no purpose beyond passing through. The breeze left behind a deeper quiet. The path continued steady and unchanged, carrying the calm forward without interruption. Nothing waited ahead. Nothing needed to happen. The night was arriving in its own time, and everything along the path accepted it without resistance. The path moved forward into the night without changing its shape or direction. It did not narrow or widen again. It simply continued, familiar and quiet, as though it had no awareness of time passing at all. The sky above had darkened into a deep, even tone. The few stars that had appeared earlier remained steady and distant, neither growing brighter nor fading away. They held their places without movement, scattered loosely, with wide spaces between them. The grass along the path now carried a faint weight. Dew had begun to form, settling gently on each blade. It clung there without dripping, without sparkle, content to remain unseen. The grass bent slightly more than before, accepting the moisture without resistance. The trees stood deeper in shadow. Their outlines softened further, becoming less about individual shapes and more about presence. They no longer framed the path so much as accompanied it, standing quietly nearby. The air felt cool and balanced, not cold, not warm, just settled. Each breath of air seemed the same as the last, unchanged and predictable. Far away, an owl called once. The sound was low and brief, not sharp enough to startle, not long enough to linger. It traveled through the open space and dissolved into the darkness, leaving nothing behind it. The path passed a small rise in the land, barely noticeable. The ground lifted slightly, then returned to level. The change was so gentle it almost went unnoticed, like a slow breath taken without thought. At the side of the path, a cluster of stones rested together, gathered there naturally over time. Their surfaces were cool and smooth, darkened by the evening air. They had no order, no pattern, just quiet proximity. The night continued to deepen, but nothing else changed. No new sounds appeared, no movement drew attention. The land seemed complete as it was. A light breeze returned briefly, moving slower than before. It brushed the grass and passed between the trees, carrying with it the faint, clean scent of earth. It lingered for a moment longer this time, then faded completely. Silence returned, fuller than before. The path now felt less like a destination and more like a presence. Something that existed simply because it always had. It asked for nothing. It offered nothing beyond steadiness. The stars remained unchanged. The sky held its color. The land rested beneath it all, unbothered by time, unconcerned with what came next. Somewhere beneath the ground, roots continued their slow, unseen work. Above them, leaves rested. The soil held warmth gently, releasing it at a pace too slow to notice. The path did not end. It did not need to. Everything had settled into its place for the night. The air, the ground, the trees, the quiet sounds that might appear and fade again without meaning. Nothing more needed to happen. Nothing more would. The night held steady, calm, and complete, and the path continued on exactly as it always had, silent, patient, and unchanged.